All right, let's pull back the curtain on one of the oldest crimes in the book, deception. Today, we're going to dive deep into the world of swindling, or as it's known in the legal world, estafa. And look, this isn't just about someone grabbing your wallet. Nope. This is a crime built on the sneaky, careful manipulation of trust. It's all about the power of a lie and what happens when that fundamental thing that holds us together is shattered for someone else's gain.
Before we get into all the legal stuff, let's get personal for a second. Just think about it. What's the absolute worst lie you've ever been told? Maybe it was some little white lie that just spiraled out of control. Or maybe it was a huge, life-altering betrayal. That feeling, that sting of being deceived, of having your trust just completely violated, that's the very heart of the crime we're exploring today. It's that shared human experience that the law is trying to address. Okay, here's our roadmap for today. First up, we'll define the art of the steal. Then, we're going to flip through a deceiver's playbook to see all their moves. After that, we'll examine the blueprint for deception to really get inside the criminal mind. Then, we'll see what happens when the con collapses. And finally, we'll look at some of the legal twists and turns and exceptions and escape routes.
So let's kick things off with Section 1, the art of the steal. We're defining a crime that is, at its core, a direct attack on trust. You know, swindling isn't like a mugging in a dark alley. It's a violation that often comes with a friendly handshake and a warm smile. And that's what makes it so corrosive. It eats away at the very fabric of our relationships, both personal and professional.
So what is estafa, really? Well, the textbook definition is defrauding someone through deceit, false pretenses, or an abuse of confidence. The end goal is always the same, right? To get their hands on money, property, or anything of value. But here's the real kicker. A robber uses force to take what isn't theirs. A swindler, on the other hand, uses words, charm, and manipulation to convince you to just hand it over.
And this really gets to the heart of it all. The weapon here isn't a gun or a knife. It's a carefully, beautifully crafted lie. A con artist's entire arsenal is made up of falsehoods, illusions, and broken promises. They don't have to kick your door down. They just talk their way right through it. They disarm you not with threats, but with a story that's just too good to be true.
So how do they actually do it? What are the moves? Well, that brings us to Section 2, a deceiver's playbook. Now we're getting into what lawyers call the actus reus, which is just a fancy Latin term for the criminal act itself. This is the what of the crime. What specific physical actions turn a simple lie into a serious felony?
So the law basically breaks down the swindler's playbook into three main strategies. First, you've got abuse of confidence. That's all about betraying a trust that's already there. Second, there's false pretenses, which is about creating a total lie from thin air. And third, you have fraudulent means, which involves using specific, tricky tools to get the job done. Let's unpack each one.
All right, this first method is all about exploiting a relationship you already have. Think of it like the insider job of swindling. So picture this. You give your mechanic your car to sell on commission. He sells it, pockets all the money, and then has the nerve to tell you he's still looking for a buyer. Or how about an employee you trust with the company credit card who goes on a personal shopping spree? In both situations, they're using the trust you gave them as a weapon against you.
Now, this second tool is all about building a complete fantasy. This is your classic con man, right? Out of a movie. It's the person who pretends to have a friend high up in the government who can, fix your legal problems for a small fee. Or the person who fakes the deed to a piece of land they don't even own and sells it to you. They aren't breaking your trust. They're manufacturing a fake reality from scratch and getting you to trust that.
And the third toolkit, this one involves specific deceitful actions. The most famous one, of course, is the bouncing check. You know the drill. Someone promises to pay you with a post-dated check, knowing darn well that their account is empty and will stay empty. This bucket also includes things like using marked cards in a poker game to cheat you out of your money, or selling a car that you've secretly already used as collateral for a loan. These are real, tangible acts of fraud.
Okay, so we've seen what a swindler does, but that's only half the story. Now we move into Section 3, the blueprint for deception, where we explore the mens rea, the criminal mind. This is absolutely crucial. It's the element of intent. See, just doing one of those acts isn't always a crime. You have to have the specific, malicious intention to defraud someone.
And the law is really clear about this. The key word here is knowingly. It's not enough that the act happened. The offender has to be aware that they're deceiving someone. They have to know deep down that their whole story is a lie. And the entire point of that lie is to profit from someone else's loss.
So let's draw a really clear line here between a criminal plan and an honest mistake. Let's go back to that bouncing check. Okay, scenario 1. You write a check and you genuinely believe you have the money, but whoops, a surprise bill automatically debited your account first. The check bounces. That's probably an honest mistake. You acted in good faith. But scenario 2. You write that same check knowing your account is bone dry and you have zero plans to put money in it. That is criminal intent. That's a deliberate plan to deceive for your own gain.
And let's be real, this line is everything. It is the razor's edge that separates a civil case where someone just sues you for money from a criminal prosecution that could send you to prison for years. Proving that knowing, deliberate intent to defraud, that's what turns a simple bad deal into the very serious crime of estafa.
Which of course brings us to section 4, when the con collapses. So what happens when all the lies just fall apart? This is where we look at the real damage done to the victim and the very real, very serious penalties the swindler faces when they finally get caught.
You know, the harm goes so much deeper than just the money. Of course, there's the direct financial hit. We're talking life savings, a family home, retirement funds. But there's also the violation of trust, which can be absolutely devastating emotionally. It just erodes our ability to trust anyone else. And on top of all that, the victims are then stuck with the massive legal burden of trying to claw back what they lost. The damage is deep and it's personal.
So what's the price the swindler has to pay? Well, the penalties are tied directly to how much was stolen. The more you take, the more time you're going to do. For a relatively small fraud, under 40,000 pesos, maybe a few months. But just watch how fast this escalates. You get into the millions, and you're suddenly looking at over a decade behind bars. Steal more than 4.4 million, and you're facing a minimum of 17 years. And it can go way, way up from there.
But wait, check this out. The law has special and often way harsher penalties for fraud using bouncing checks. Just look at that lowest amount. For under 40,000 pesos, the penalty starts at 6 years. Why? Well, think about it. A check is supposed to be as good as cash. Our whole economy kind of relies on that trust. When you knowingly write a bad check, you're not just cheating one person. You're attacking the trust that makes business even possible. So yeah, the law comes down on that like a ton of bricks.
And for the really big frauds involving a bad check, the penalty can be reclusion perpetua. We're talking 20 years or more. Just let that sink in. For writing a piece of paper you know is worthless, if the amount is high enough, you could spend the better part of your life in prison. That's how seriously the law takes this specific kind of betrayal. All right, for our final section, let's get into the interesting nuances of the law in exceptions and escape routes. We're going to look at some very specific types of swindling that the law highlights, and then we'll check out the arguments an accused person might try to make in their own defense. So the law creates an extra shield for the most vulnerable among us. Article 317 specifically makes it a crime to take advantage of a minor. And this isn't just about stealing from them. It's about exploiting their inexperience, their emotions, their feelings, to trick them into a terrible deal, like signing away property or taking on a huge loan. The crime here is the act of exploitation itself.
So here's a fun one for you. Is telling fortunes actually a crime? Well, it can be. Believe it or not, Article 318 is sort of a catch-all for other deceits, and it makes it illegal to do things like interpret dreams, make forecasts, or tell fortunes for profit by preying on people's gullibility. The law isn't saying psychic powers are fake. It's just saying if you use those claims to take people's money, well, that's a form of deceit.
Of course, everyone has a right to a defense, right? And the arguments almost always come back to that one critical word, intent. The defense will argue there was no intent to defraud, that it was all a big misunderstanding, an honest mistake, an act of good faith. And while paying the victim back doesn't just make the crime disappear, it can sometimes soften the blow in the eyes of the court. And that brings us to our final thought for today. The legal ideas we've talked about are old. They were written for a world of paper contracts and face-to-face handshakes. So the big question we're left with is this. In our modern age of deepfakes, AI-generated voices, and totally fake online identities, how does this timeless crime of deception change? The tools of the swindler are getting scarier and more powerful every single day, and the law is in a constant race to keep up.